Ian came out what was it, about 2 months ago?
Yeah, about that.
Yeah. And gave us a wonderful presentation about soaring and the whole world of sailplanes. Much more detailed than I had imagined, and I learned a lot. Well, I thought I knew something about that field, but boy, did I not. So now he's going to regale us with some thoughts about one of the subsets of soaring is that you have to be much more aware of the weather than we as powered pilots are, although we have to be aware of it, but it becomes more critical when you don't have one of those things that's spinning that fan that keeps the pilot cool up there. So Ian?
Okay.
I apologize, we sort of miscommunicated, I miscommunicated, so we don't have a laptop. So
we have a presentation.
Yeah. So everybody's going to have to sort of hold that up to their head.
Is that something you can send us out?
So you're going to have to sort of visualize this in your mind as he talks. But I'm sure we'll get along with that.
Yeah, so I'll do the old soft shoe here. Yeah. Well, good morning. Thanks for coming. Yeah, I'm not quite know how I got into this, but the last presentation, some bright spark said, well, I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say about microclimates, because obviously we know a fair amount more about that than the average power pilot, because if we don't understand the weather, we just don't get there. You know, that's the problem. In order to fly a glider some distance, and it's not unusual on a day like what today is probably going to be, if it's like yesterday, to get in a glider and fly 300 miles to a predetermined point. Get up in the morning and say we're going to go from wherever it is, from Ephrata up to the Grand Coulee Dam, whatever, and you actually go there and get back. And to do that, you have to really understand the weather. So that's where I'm coming from, and as a result of doing that, I've learned a few little nuggets about the weather forecasting and what the weather is going to really turn out like, which is usually different from what you see in your weather information that you get. We all get off the internet. If you were sitting down somewhere else right now, say you were down in Samson, and you looked at the current weather here, I'm not sure you'd want to fly here. Because it says it's probably, is it still?
It's getting up.
It's getting up there, but it's still a problem. And this information that's probably on the AWAS right now is at least 2 hours old, maybe even older than that. And most of the information you get it's got two problems with it. First of all, it's macro. It's information that's gleaned from sometimes hundreds of different weather stations and averaged out. So it's telling you about what the weather's going on in a couple of 100 square mile area, not what's going on right here or on your route or at your destination. And most of that information, not only is it averaged out and sort of amalgamated, but it's 4 hours old when they actually get it out there and publish it. And then you get a bunch of guys sitting in the back concrete room with no windows, because we know they have no windows, they never look out to see what the weather's like, who analyze that data and look at all the numbers and the K factors and the wind direction and all that crap, and they come up with this forecast, which is 4 hour old data, 2 hours of analysis work, and then they put it out on the web or wherever it is you happen to get it from. So by the time you actually get it, it's 6 hours old, okay, and it's going to take you 3 hours to get there. So the weather information you have about your destination could be at 8 o'clock in the morning, which right here would be foggy, when in fact when you get there it's going to be a beautiful day with puffy white clouds all over the place and clear as a bell. Okay, so it's quite obvious that the macro data that we use for weather forecasting, if you're flying locally, and I'm really addressing pilots here who fly, you know, the $200 lunch crowd, you know, who fly 50 miles someplace other to get an expensive hamburger and then come home. I'm not talking about the guys who fly 15,000 feet in the Bonanza and they go 300 miles and have a $300 hamburger.
Where are you buying your fuel?
I
want to go there.
what I want to talk about then is, you know, what's the real need for microclimates, and how do we use them, and why do we use them, and what kind of information can you use? Because what you want is real time, and there isn't anything that's real time. The only thing that's real time is what you see out of the window. That's why I said I have all these basic objections to most of these weather stations, as you see, which are in concrete boxes with nobody looking out of the window, so I have no idea how they really forecast what the weather's going to be like. So a really good example is Bremerton, okay? And this is a common microclimate that we've had here this morning, is we've got ground fog, okay? Anybody got any answers as to how we could predict ground fog from a couple of numbers that we know, usually pretty much real time? Temperature and dew point, okay? So if we can get a handle on what the current dew point is, and what the temperature is, and what it's been like over the last couple of hours, is it trending down, is it trending up, okay? We could probably predict reasonably accurate, and I want to take bets right now, and you'll get a piece of paper and write down the time that Bremerton's going to go at VFR. Okay? And we'll see who wins. So write down that time, because what we can do is go check what the current temperature is, and it's probably going up at something like 2 degrees per hour, okay, which is normal, and we're probably about 6 degrees or 5 degrees, probably a bit less than that now. Has anybody know what the temperature is right now from the AWAS or whatever?
6 degrees.
Okay, it's maybe a couple of degrees off of dew point, still below dew point. So my prediction would be that it's going to be an hour, which puts us at let's say 9, that's 10:30. So I'm going to be safe and say I'm going to say 11 o'clock, and we'll go. That's pretty conservative, okay? And that's important. If I'm 2 hours away, I really want to know that, okay? Because I want to know whether I can get into Bremerton or not. So that's a very simple example. And here's a situation where the weather forecast is telling you right now what this is like, because you can call in on the phone and you can get the information that this airport is IFR right now, okay? But you can take two numbers which are easily obtainable, which are real-time numbers, that you know what they are right now, this minute, and use that information to make your own projection about what time it's going to be good, if it's ever going to be good. First of all, you want to know if it's going to be flyable at all. So and that's a very simple example. But what about all the other things that we can predict about the weather, which we may or may not know from the weather forecast, but we can predict a bit more critically by looking at some real-time numbers, okay? And I made a list of those. First one was fog, of course. Another one is icing, hail. Icing in particular, we do get a lot of that, and especially springtime here. And anybody know one of the ways that we can do that? If we know, what numbers do we have to know in order to predict icing?
Temperature?
Temperature, yep.
Lapse rate?
Lapse rate, yep, that's the most important one. Lapse rate. One other thing, what does it take to have ice?
Moisture.
Moisture. Well, how do we measure moisture?
Humidity.
Well, also relative humidity, right? So can you get relative humidity data real time? Pretty much, right? And can you get temperature real time? And we mostly can wing the adiabatic rate, I mean the lapse rate, okay? 2 degrees per 1,000 feet that you take off, and it's freezing is going to be 32, okay? And it's 41 right now, all right? What's the altitude of the freezing point? 3,000 AGL, right? 3,000 AGL. If there's enough moisture, you're probably going to have ice. Okay? And then depending on whether there's precipitation or not, you can determine whether is it going to be rime ice, is it going to be that horrible stuff that's nice and filmy. We had a presentation on that not too long ago, so I'm not going to go into the details of how you can actually predict whether it's going to be rime ice. I don't care what kind of ice it is. I don't want any ice on my gliding things. And it happens to us too, because we get pretty high. We generally actually get higher than you guys, because we don't have this issue. We can climb in thermals and wave and all that kind of stuff. And I've personally been to 42,000 feet, and it gets cold up there. So, that's another example, icing. It's not that hard. You don't have to be a PhD in weather, and I'm certainly not a PhD in weather. My daughter just graduated, by the way, in meteorology, so she might be with us the next time. Okay, so that's another situation where you can actually get the numbers real time, and if you know the mechanism, and this is what I'm trying to get across today, if you know the mechanism about how that affects the weather, you can use it to your own advantage. Okay. Another one is convection turbulence. Okay. Under what conditions do we get those big, nice, puffy clouds, which I like to fly with? How do we get those? You know? Yes, Jim.
Vertical movement of the air.
Yeah, and what causes that?
Updraft.
Updraft. Yeah. But what causes the updraft? The heat. Okay. So you got to have heating on the ground. Okay. And you have to have a lapse rate, right? And the lapse rate has to be a number which is such that the temperature above the ground is lower than the temperature on the ground by more than the lapse rate. So if the lapse rate is 3 degrees per 1,000 feet and the temperature goes down 4 degrees, that means it's colder than it should be. So a parcel of air gets buoyant more quickly, and that's how you get it. So you look at the lapse rate, look at the sounding, which tells you the temperatures aloft. Generally, those are available every hour from various sources. So you can get an idea what the actual lapse rate is, and you can tell whether you're going to have a bumpy ride or not. Okay? Anybody know what a Z-chart is? Okay? Z-chart is the thing that measures the temperature of the air with altitude, and it also measures the humidity with altitude. So if you know both of those things, not only do you know whether you're going to have rising air, okay, but you also know the temperature at which the cloud base is going to be. You can predict, generally speaking, from those two numbers, you can predict the cloud base within 100 feet. Pretty straightforward, okay? So, that's another situation. So if you're going to take your mother-in-law for a ride, you may want to know, is this going to be the kind of day when we should take her, yeah? Whereas, for instance, this Wednesday, I think the K factor was 23, and I could have chucked my toolbox in the air and it would have stayed up. We had some pretty ferocious thermals out there with lift, 500 to 600 feet a minute under some of those big queues. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about. I fly a lot with Duncan, and we go around, and he doesn't like bumps, and I do. So we go looking for bumps for a while, and then he gets fed up with it, and then we go get a little higher. So when you're out there and you've got a day like Wednesday and there's these huge queues all over the place, okay, you have two choices. And I came back from Ephrata last weekend in a 182 with 4 people in it, and we had the thing firewalled, and we did eventually get to 11,500, and the tops were at about 14. So we were weaving our way around between one and the other like this, to get through there, to get back into the valley. And I'm looking at this thinking, in between these clouds, the air is sinking at about 500 feet a minute, which is about the max climb rate of a 182, best case, And so we're flying in this sinking air, okay? But it's relatively smooth, all right? But that's as far as that puppy will go. And I'm thinking, if I was in my glider, I'd be going as fast as this. I would be under the clouds where the lift is 500 feet a minute up, and I would probably get home before they do, okay? The difference being is that you have to do a little circling, and it's very bumpy, so your mother-in-law probably wouldn't like it too much, okay?
Which may not be
but you use a hell of a lot less fuel. And there have been days when you can leave here, and a nice day when you've got those nice queues all over the place. And it's possible in a 172, which I think an idle power has got a glide ratio of about 45 to 1, and you could make it all the way to Port Townsend with the power off, right, Duncan?
Yeah, if you say so.
Because it's, if you pull the power back and you can get it wrapped up tight, you can circle underneath one of these clouds and climb 400 or 500 feet a minute, just as much as you could with the power full on. So you can use that. Now, I know what everybody likes to do. On most of the power pilots I've been with, you set your GPS, you put your bug where you want to go, and that's the way you go. And that, that gets you to the closest hamburger pretty easily. But if you deviate and go from cloud to cloud, you can go get that hamburger and probably reduce the price by a factor of 2 by using nature to power your airplane instead of using all that gas. Okay. So that's a choice. And how do you predict that? Well, again, if you go on the internet, there's generally some pretty good real-time numbers. In fact, you can go get a graph that has green and gray profile on it that shows you where the areas of lift are. Okay, and if you have radar, if you have a radar map, you can actually see where the densest clouds are. Then look at the density chart on the radar, and you can see where most of the lift is going to be. And naturally, what happens is most of the lift, going back to the initial question, what causes this convection? Okay, is you've got to have some moisture, you've got to have heating, ground heating. Okay, and what else do you need? There's one other very important thing you need in order to get convection turbulence. Anybody? Yes? You need mechanical lift. You need something to trigger it. Okay, so if you have a hill and the wind's blowing towards that hill, it will push that warm air up that hill, and it creates that bubble, and it eventually becomes a continuous stream of rising air, and on the top of that stream of rising air, you're going to get that cloud. Okay, so, but without that mechanical lift, that turbulence won't trigger. So when you look out here, in fact, I can see some of it happening right now. The lift, the big clouds, are always over the highest terrain. Okay, so if you want to go find that lift, don't fly in the valley, fly in the higher terrain. Obviously, you want to be in a situation where the clouds are above the terrain, unless you really want to go IFR. But you pick the clouds that have the densest, blackest bases. Okay, those are the ones with the most lift. And because they're related to the terrain, one of the things that happens is the clouds are lined up in what we call streets. And you've been out there, if you've been in a jetliner and you look out of the window, that's what you see. The clouds are lined up in little rows. And we love those. You get underneath those things and you just fly along. And when you come under a cloud, you slow down a little bit, pull the power back. We don't have any power, but and the glider will just balloon up, slow down, and it will climb and climb and climb. As soon as it starts to go down again, you let it glide back down, put the power back on, and you use the power between them. You can do that, or what you can do is just maintain altitude and use the power to keep the altitude. So when the airplane goes up, you pull the power back, and when it starts going down again on the other side of the cloud, you add the power back on again. So it's how electric cars work, basically. It's the same idea. So you're conserving all that energy by using the energy in the air instead of using the energy in your fuel tank. Okay. Anybody got any questions on that? Because that's a different concept from most power pilots, or go in the valley where it's clear, firewalled, and makes a big difference to your fuel consumption.
Ian,
Yeah, sure.
In the world of soaring, what percentage of aircraft are powered sailplanes as opposed to the ones you have to be launched or towed out?
Well, there's actually two kinds of powered sailplanes. There's one that they call powered sailplanes, powered gliders, okay, which are kind of like powered sailboats. They're a lousy sailboat and an even worse powerboat, which have a propeller on the front. And there are, I'd say, maybe 10% of the U.S. fleet is that kind of, there's one parked out here. And they're not very efficient, they're not very good gliders. I used to have a DG400 which had got a snowmobile motor which retracted into the back of the fuselage and had enough horsepower to take off. It was kind of like taking off in a B-52. You kind of wondered halfway down a 3,000-foot runway whether it was really going to get off the ground. But once it was airborne, it would climb 900 feet a minute. And today, there's probably around a third of the glider fleet in the U.S. are what they call auxiliary power sailplanes, which has a retractable engine.
Like this one out here.
Yeah, that one has a prop, so
It actually folds inside.
it's pretty folds. Yeah, that's a stemming. Yeah, and in fact, Vans. Most of you know who Vans is, I guess. He's working on I understand he's working on a kit sailplane with a retractable electric engine.
Really?
Yeah, and he flies. He's got a fiberglass aircraft called an Antares himself, which has a retractable electric engine in it. He usually takes an aero tow, and then he uses the engine as a safe so he can get home if he runs out of lift and ideas on the same time. So they, it's in this country I'd say it's less than 30% of all the gliders. But if you go into Europe and Germany, I'd say it's more like 75% of all the gliders now are motorized in some way or other. And there's even a few jets. There's a South African company called Yonkers, no relation to the guys that built the Stukas, who build a jet. It's a jet pack that's retractable and it's behind the cockpit, and it pops up on a little stalk and produces enough power to take off. But it only has about 45 minutes of duration.
In competition soaring, are you allowed to use an engine?
Yes and no. I haven't done anything about jets yet, but you can use a retractable engine, and you have to have a logger that indicates when the engine's on and off. And if you use the engine after
points or something.
Yeah, what it does is it's if you power the engine up after the start, you're allowed to use the engine to climb up to start. And once you've gone through the start, if you put the engine out again, you get disqualified there. Okay. It has to be a sealed recorder that records that. Any other questions on that? Okay, so back to the convection stuff. It's predictable. So you get K factor, which you can get pretty easily. Generally speaking, you need moisture, you need heating, and you need a mechanical lift device. So usually that's the mountains. I'm not going to go into this too deeply, but in this area we all know about the what do you call it, the layer that goes on up by Seattle, where you get two weather systems meet that go around the Olympics and crash together. And usually what happens is one goes underneath the other. The colder air goes underneath the warmer air, and you get this shear line. And shear line is a mechanical lifting mechanism. So that's why you get some pretty horrendous convection going on at that point, because that marine layer pushes up the warmer air, and boom, and it explodes. And so you get some pretty nasty thunderstorms. And of course, those are a hazard.
Who had 938 for VFR?
Oh, with VFR? Okay. Well, I was off by a little bit. Does anybody come close?
VFR now?
One end of the field.
Oh, I got the direction. I was looking up the
I said 11. Yeah, I think we got a few 11s, right? Hey, who said 11?
11.
Yeah.
You had a 1042.
11:15. Okay. Okay.
Ian, there was one that you made an observation. You know, flying around here, it's cool. It's not Eastern Washington, so you don't get a lot of heat or anything like that. But flying from water, even though it's on a cool day, flying from water to land gives you something. Why don't you expand on that?
Yeah, that's a very good one, because that happens a lot. And in fact, I was flying with a guy up in the freighter last summer, and I have a DG-1000 on my partnership. It's this big 22-meter behemoth that looks like a B-52. And he was flying for the first or second time, and we kind of got shot down, and we were over the plateau east of Ephrata, which is about 1,500 feet above the valley floor, and we were only about 800 feet above the plateau. So we were looking for a place to land. And he said, "Where do you think the next thermal is? Where can we find a thermal?" And so over where the Soap Lake is, you've got some nice brown, dark desert over there, and then the water of Slope Lake. So I said, head for the edge of the lake. And we got over the edge of the lake, and boom, they had a thermal instantly. And what's the reason for that? It's because you've got a great temperature differential. The water takes some time to heat up. So usually by 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the dark ground is nice and hot, and the cooler water, okay, and if the wind's blowing over the water and pushing the cooler wind off the water towards the heated land, bam, you're going to have a thermal right there. So when you're transitioning, I know a lot of airports. There's a very nasty one in California called Bridgeport. And the runway actually sticks out into the water. It's half of the runway is in the water, and the rest of the runway is on the dry land. And you come over that thing and make the approach from the water, and it's calm and cool, and you just get back to the middle of the runway where the land is, and BAM! The next thing you know, you're 500 feet above the ground again. Because of that cold water's getting pushed in there. The blacktop, you could fry an egg on in the middle of the desert out there, and so you suddenly get this thermal activity. And I've seen that happen even here. Any place, this is one of the next things I was going to talk about, is whenever you have an interface like that, water causes some serious changes in the weather conditions. And that's why we have this kind of thing here. It's not just this is because it's Bremerton, it's because we have a local large body of water which creates this moisture, and it helps with the cooling. So if the wind is blowing over that lake, cooling the air, you can, in the evening, what happens is it cools down, you get some cool air off the lake, and you'll go into the, below the dew point in a matter of half an hour. And all of a sudden you've got clear weather here, and half an hour later, boom, it's sucked in. And those are the reasons. So it doesn't take a lot of imagination, and you don't have to be a PhD in micro weather to look at some of these things and make predictions like that. I'm going to go into this airport I've never been in before. There's a big body of water there, okay, and you know which way the wind's blowing. There's certain things you do know, and look at the weather forecast and say, is that real compared to the conditions that I can see, okay, and make some judgments about that, okay, which you can't get from most weather forecasts. I mean, most weather forecasts will just tell you the conditions on there. First of all, they don't want to get sued by giving you a forecast that gives that kind of information. So draw your own conclusions from the real data and an observation of the terrain. Okay. Okay. So we talked about convection. One of the things that happens with convection, if you get enough convection, is it gets to 10/10. And on a day when you see the projection that you're going to have a very high lapse rate, which means you might have thunderstorms. The other possibility that you get, if you go VFR on top, you get to the point maybe by 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon where you don't have any holes left. So if you're on top and you're expecting when you get to your destination, well, I'm good right now, I'll spiral down to a nice big hole. 3 hours later when you get there might not be a nice big hole. So you have to be prepared that you're going to come back through that with either take a chance or you're going to go IFR to get through that. And that can be an issue that you want to plan ahead for, okay? All right, so we talked about that. I wish I had my slides here. The next one is clear air turbulence. How many people have hit some, couple of G's up or down flying around here? Yes, sir. Where?
In Florida.
In Florida? Okay.
Yeah.
Sierras.
In the Sierras, yep. You, sir?
Mexico.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. On the Allegheny Ridge?
Yes.
Okay. How many people have ever flown in wave? Mountain wave?
Not intentionally.
Not intentionally. Anybody know about where there's some significant mountain wave here every springtime? I mean, like every other day in springtime? Ever seen mountain wave here?
No?
Yeah,
Mount
right
Rainier.
there.
Mount Rainier, okay. There are 2 airports on the east of Mount Rainier, Packwood and Ranger Creek, okay. And if I'll try to describe it, but this is I'm looking at the map, and this is Mount Rainier right here, and Ranger Creek is up here, about 20 miles away, less than that, and Packwood's down here, okay. In this one, the valleys go down to the south. This one, the valley goes up slightly to the north, okay? And if I was going to fly over there and I see lenticulars over Mount Rainier, I would think twice about going to those little airports, because there's a fairly reasonable chance that you're going to have violent rotor over one or both of those airports, okay? Does anybody know anything about the structure of wave and the kind of thing that happens? Okay, and this is worth a little deviation. The best way to describe wave is water flowing in a river, a deep river, 10-foot deep river with a 1-foot log in the bottom, okay? So the water flows along and it hits the log, and the entire 10 feet of water goes like this. and right immediately behind it there are eddies. And there's usually a series of waves. It's not just one wave, but you'll get a second wave and a third wave, maybe even a fourth wave. And what happens is, if this is the mountain, the air flows over that mountain, you get this hydraulic jump, and they've measured lift at 500 feet a minute at 60,000 feet in U-2s. Okay, so it gets up there, and particularly over the Sierras and the Andes. And on the back side of it, it curls over. So you get a rotor this way, usually capped by some little clouds that look like they're actually rotating this way. And these are capped by what looks like a cloud, but it's actually an ice layer. It's a straight layer called a lenticular, and it looks like a cloud, but it's actually made of ice. And the moisture becomes ice at a certain level, usually 20 to 30,000 feet, and then dissipates. It actually, if you get up there and you watch it, you can see the ice form, and then it comes out the other side, it melts. But here, you've got this rotor going this way, and then you get a second rotor going this way. So in between the two rotors, you have a shear where in 10 feet over here, the air is going up at 30 miles an hour, and 10 feet over there, it's going down at 30 miles an hour. And I've seen a Pawnee tow plane fly through that and just go boom on its back, okay? And it happens, and that's really violent. And 99% of the time, it's below the ridge line, okay? And it's obviously on the lee side, okay? And mountain wave is probably, even the jets stay away from mountain wave because it's dangerous stuff, okay? And it's all clear. You may see lenticulars on a dry day. You're going to have serious wave. You don't see anything. There's no warning, no apparent warning. There may not be anything in the forecast. The most likely thing you're going to get is a few NOTAMs that says that there's clear air turbulence at Reno or wherever it may be, okay? And not only is it dangerous, but unless you know what you're doing, you can be flying very inefficiently. And you were talking about the Sierras. I made a trip. 4 of us were in gliders. This is 3 or 4 years ago now. And we were coming back from Independence, California. 4 of us in airplanes without engines. And we're flying just east of the Sierras. But all of us going about 125 miles an hour, which at that speed, normally the glider's going to go down about 500 or 600 feet a minute, okay? And we're maintaining altitude, so we're in lift at least 500 feet a minute. And a bit further to the east, there's a Bonanza who's coming up from Southern California, and he starts off calling Reno about fuel. He assumes he's going to get to Reno. He's got enough fuel for Reno. Within 15 minutes, he's calling Carson City, which is 30 or 40 miles south of Reno, to see about fuel, because he's decided he's not got enough fuel to get as far as Reno. And this goes on, for about half an hour or 3/4 of an hour. And each time he's calling someplace further and further south because he's getting to realize that he's not going to make it. And what's happening is we're flying in, this is where the wave is right here, here's our mountain right here. And we're flying right here in the wave, going up 500 feet a minute. Well, we would be if we were slowed down. And he's over here, and it's going down 500 feet a minute. So he's got this Bonanza firewalled, and he can barely maintain altitude. So we keep calling him on the radio, saying, "Why don't you come east about 4 miles, and you can turn the engines off." And eventually he did, and we see him coming by, and then he's a Beamers, and that's when he sees us, And we see him come over, he goes, "Whoa!" And suddenly, he's 3,000 feet above us. And the SOB never even said thanks, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Go ahead.
What's a safe distance to maintain from mountain wave?
100 miles.
No. Generally speaking, the wave itself is absolutely smooth. There are no bumps in the wave itself. Once you're in the lift part of the wave, there are no bumps, okay? The dangerous place is on the lee side below the ridgeline, okay? And if you're below, so if you're coming from, say, the Cascades or the Sierras, I know the Sierras better, so I'll talk about that, and you're coming from Winnemucca or something like that, and going into San Francisco, you're going to approach the Sierras from the lee side. And if the ridge line's about 10,000 feet. So if you're at 9,000 feet, you're in deep trouble. But when you get to within 5 miles of those mountains, one of two things will happen. You will either land or the airplane will come apart. Okay? It gets that ferocious. And if there's lenticulars there, and you actually see the rotor cloud, I mean, the clouds, they look like, like animal claws. You can see that they're actually trying to rotate, and they dissipate before they go all the way around. But I've seen them. I wish I got the picture here. I've got a tremendous picture taken by an AOP pilot in a glider with my son. You can see this thing twisting, and you look at that picture and you say, God, I'm glad I'm not in that. It's horrendous. And they've had recorded violent updrafts and downdrafts, 11 Gs in just outside in a place called Genoa, which is not far from Minden. 11 Gs, which is enough to take most airplanes, take the wings off of most airplanes. Gliders are rated a little higher, they're usually 6 or 7, but a typical, 182 or whatever would come unglued in that kind of stuff. So the answer is, if you're above the ridgeline, you're relatively safe. Okay. If you're below the ridgeline, the place you don't want to be within, I'd say, 10 miles of the lee side of those mountains, or you're in trouble. And the problem is you can't see it. Okay. But is it predictable? Yeah. How do you predict it?
Winds.
Winds. Okay. So what kind of wind do you need?
Over
Perpendicular.
Perpendicular. So it has to be perpendicular to terrain, right? That's issue number one. The second thing you have to have a wind gradient. All right. So if you're given a forecast today down at let's talk about on the east side there, you've got a forecast, something on the ground that's telling you the wind is 5 knots on the ground, and then you've got a ski resort or something where it's saying it's 22 knots on the ridgeline. That's a high wind gradient. Okay, and you need a high wind gradient. You need about 25 knots over a 4,000 or 5,000 foot interval to generate wave. Okay, and you need stable air. Generally speaking, wave won't trigger. Not always the case, but generally speaking, you won't see wave when you've got cues and unstable air. It takes stable air. It takes high winds. And usually that's prefrontal. So when you get prefrontal conditions, it's nice and calm, and you've got some cold air, it's pretty stable, and it starts to blow right before the front comes through, you can have wave. Okay. Now we talked about wave over Mount Rainier. Which way does the wind have to blow to get wave over Mount Rainier? It's kind of like this, isn't it? It basically doesn't matter. Right. I mean, you can have wind out of the southwest or out of the northwest, and you'll see those lenticulars. Generally speaking, it doesn't happen when you get easterly winds, but west winds from a 90-degree quadrant will produce significant lenticular clouds over Mount Rainier. And if it's coming from the northwest, don't go to Packwood. If it's coming from the southward, don't go to Ranger Station. Okay, that would be a problem, because you're going to have the rotor is going to be right there where that little airport is. Okay, and if you read the information, I can't remember which was it Ranger Station we went in. There is a note on that says that under certain conditions it's very turbid. The approach is turbid. Okay, and it's also in a canyon, which is we'll come back to that. Okay, so again, the clear air turbulence, which is mostly caused by wave conditions, is good and bad. Okay, it's bad if you don't know it's there and you fly into it, because it can have disastrous results on your insurance policy. But it's good because if you fly along that line of mountains, whether you're coming up the Sierras or up the Cascades, okay, or for example, if you were flying from Sanderson up to Port Townsend, along the east side of the Olympics, okay, you'll find wave right there. You want to be above that ridgeline, so you've got to be about 8,000 feet or higher, and you'll have wave along that ridgeline right there. And so you can pull the throttle back and maintain the same airspeed and without having to have all that power, and get you to Port Townsend lunch for a $25 hamburger. So. But if you get lower than that, and that's why sometimes you get over the Hood Canal when there's lenticulars on there. If there's lenticulars over the Olympics and you're over the Hood Canal at 3,000 feet it could be a bumpy ride. Any of you experienced that? Okay. And that's the reason is you've got that rotor down in the Hood Canal. That's not a good place to be. And I wondered about that accident they had with the RV that just recently, and I wondered whether if that may be what happened to that guy. He hit some really turbulent air, and but you know, anybody know? Anybody seen any reports of that causes an accident? No.
We're pretty sure that the tail came apart with AD out on those.
Oh, was it? Okay. So the tail came off.
Well,
They don't.
don't know exactly how it happened, but yeah, he lost control of the airplane.
Yeah.
With some kind of a spar issue in the tail.
Oh wow! Before it hit the ground, it hit the water. Wow. Okay.
But that might have been tied to turbulence, right?
Yeah, some kind of turbulence.
Turbulence,
would have
yeah.
exacerbated that.
So,
Yeah.
so if you did get caught up in this, what would be your remediation?
If you got into rotor,
Yeah,
If you
if
hit the rotor
inadvertently
plate.
you get into it, now what do you do?
okay.
What would be your recommendation? Do 180 and try and back out of it, or?
Well, if you've been flying for, it's not very wide. So I'd say, you've got 4 or 5 miles of really, smashing your teeth, hitting your head on the canopy type of turbulence. Okay. And if you've been doing that for 5 minutes, I just push through. Okay. Because otherwise you're going to go back through the same stuff, right?
Right.
The thing to avoid is don't turn 90 degrees in either direction, because you're just going to perpetuate it, because normally it's it's parallel to the terrain. So don't fly parallel to the terrain, because you'll stay in it. So either turn around, if it's just happening, just starting, turn around, go back. Okay, and then you climb up high enough, climb higher than the ridge line, and you can go over it. Okay. The alternative, and if you go into Bishop, they fly gliders down there too, and the tow pilots will generally tow the gliders out at about 800 feet. I hate it because you're not high enough to get back to the field, but they'll tow the gliders out at 800 feet underneath the rotor, and then when they get to the other side, then they'll climb up. I wouldn't advise that. Yes, sir.
When I learned, I got my private in Reno. I was living in Reno at the time. And
Yes.
the instructors always told us, don't try to power your way out.
Right.
By going nose up.
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive. You go nose down,
Yeah.
power.
Power, yeah.
You may be going down 1,000 feet a minute,
That's right.
but to get on the other side of it was always the goal.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's-
I'd like to address the hydraulic part of this. I'm an engineer and I've dealt with this on the rivers. But on a low head dam, you have the water coming over the log, just as you said.
Yeah.
And fishermen will go up close to the dam because that's the best place to fish apparently. They get caught in the rotor and then they're stuck. And it's almost impossible to get them out.
Yeah.
Okay, the rescue of those people is very, very difficult and
yeah.
dangerous, and they just get stuck there.
Get there in that. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
power down, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think what you want in any kind of turbulence, like you want to get through it quickly without exceeding your structural limitations, So yeah, put the power on and get through it. And generally speaking, it's only 4 or 5 miles wide, so you kind of estimate how much you've already passed. So if you've passed more than 50%, just keep going. But otherwise, turn around and go back through the same bad air.
You can always drop the gear, right?
Yeah.
On a 180, on a fixed gear 182.
Yeah.
You don't want to drop that. You want to hang on to it as long as
Yeah.
you can.
But the clear thing there is, you do not turn parallel to the terrain,
Yeah.
because you'll just prolong the agony. That's what will happen. The worst place to be is where the two rotors interact, because you've got one going this way and one going that way. So there's where you get that horrible shear line, and that usually occurs, and that's probably I'd say about any place between 1,000 feet and 3,500 feet AGL on the lee side. And that's where you certainly don't want to be. So if you go for the rotor first of all, and you can figure out, am I going up behind or am I going down, and it's bumpy, you may want to turn around there before you hit the second part of that secondary rotor, because that's where it's going to be really bad. And that's where you can get in serious trouble. Okay. All right, so the clear air turbulence, again, that is the predominant danger. And let's go back to how you predict it. So it is predictable because you've got to have wind gradient, and you have to have the wind at the right angle. So again, if you're going to go out and wanted to fly into Ranger Creek, okay, if there's lenticulars over there, if you look at the chart, you can see that airport, if the wind was coming out of the southwest, okay, that airport is directly on the lee side of Mount Rainier and is right about where the rotor would be. Now they have no services up there, so there's nobody you can call, but it would be enough for me to see the lenticulars on Mount Rainier to say, that's not a good day to go there, and that would be enough. Okay. Well, let's talk about, we had an interesting thing the other day at Ranger Station, because that has some other little microclimates which are common to airports we find around here in the mountains. Okay. First of all, it's in a canyon, and it's on a slope, so there's a fairly significant slope to the runway. Okay, and it slopes downward to the. I'll get this turned around right. The airport, the runway is about north-south. Okay, and the north side of it is the downhill side, and that goes into an open canyon that goes out into the valley. Okay, and the south side of it is the canyon's getting narrower and narrower, and takes a little dogleg. Okay, and it's pretty narrow. It's what, 4 or 5 miles wide, and got big trees on either side. And when Duncan and I went in there, and there was a repair party going on, and they were painting things and tidying up the airport and stuff. And the people on the ground recommended that we land to the north. And if I'd been in my glider, I wouldn't have made it, because it was a 2.5% slope to the north. So at 50 to 1 glider ratio, I'd have been 2 feet off the ground all the way into the trees at the end of the runway. Okay, because there was very little wind. This was 9 o'clock in the morning. It's almost dead calm. Okay, if anything, there was a little bit of a tailwind. Right. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it gets hot. It's 90 degrees. It's 95 degrees in that canyon. The air is rising like crazy. Where does that air come from? It comes off the valley, up that canyon. So by the time it gets to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there's a 10-15 knot headwind, no problem. So that's predictable. I mean, if we'd sat there and looked at that and said, it's going to be calm. If it's calm, we would land, instead of to the north, we'd land to the south, so that we're landing uphill. I'd rather have uphill than downwind any day, okay? So we land uphill, and then when we take off, you wait until it's heating, and so you get a north wind. Because it's preferable to go into that wider canyon than take off to the south and have to make the dogleg as you leave. So that's a typical instance where you look at the terrain, you look at the conditions, look at the wind conditions, real time, okay, and it's going to give you a completely different answer than your FAA weather forecast and all your weather information that you're going to get from the AWOS. Well, there isn't an AWOS, but from any airport that's local to that. So you're going to use your brains upstairs, okay, to make those kind of predictions. Okay, I don't have my slides, but I think I covered pretty much everything that was on there. Yeah, so you just want to summarize. The whole story I'm trying to get across here is that most of the that I know fly power plant, you always get a weather briefing in the morning, and you're looking at where you're going to go and what the weather's going to look like. When you're doing all that, sometimes you forget that that's 4-hour-old data. It's had 2 hours of massaging by some guy in a windowless room to come up with the forecast, okay? And that destination that you're looking at may be 2 hours away. So it's old bread, it's yesterday's bread that you're looking at, you know? How valuable is that to the safety of your flight, all right? Now, sure enough, it gives you a broad picture, okay? But certainly around this area, we've got lots of water, lots of mountains, lots of terrain features. Sometimes that kind of forecast isn't quite good enough, all right? So the idea of being able to mentally assess local weather conditions based on those factors is a real benefit from the safety point of view and from the comfort, you know, how comfortable is the flight going to be. As again I said, if you look at the K factor in the morning and you look at what the weather's going to do for the day, you may decide not to take mother-in-law up over the Olympics to see the vampires or whatever, you know. Because you can predict what that weather's going to be like, okay? So it's an advantage to look at any factors that you can see. And as I said, they're mostly terrain, water situation, moisture, and the lapse rate. All right, I'm going to tell you a lot about the weather, including things like fog, that you won't get from any forecast. And it's going to be current, much more current than anything you can get off the internet or from an AWASA broadcast. Okay.
Ian,
Yeah, yes, Jim.
how accurate or how current, how close to real time is are the SQT charts?
The ones that they're 2 hourly, most of them, but unfortunately they're not as widespread as as like an AWAS is. And then there's a couple of centers that do that. They do one at Ephrata because it's a soaring center, and they do one in Arlington, and those are useful. But most of the time, any other place you go, they're using interpolation. So they'll look at the temperature here, and say, well, the temperature there's going to be halfway in between, which may not be the case, of course. And they'll use that data, interpolated data, to create this Q chart. So it's not always good. So it's the same problem they have with doing all the other weather forecasts.
So what was the Q chart again?
That's the chart that shows the temperature and the dew point with altitude, okay? And that tells you whether a parcel of air is going to be buoyant or not buoyant, because if the temperature is lower than the rising parcel of air, then it's going to be very buoyant and you'll get high lift. And if it's not, and if you add moisture into it, it makes it even more liftable. So,
Where are those charts?
No, the best source of all that stuff is NOAA.
And they have Q chart or K chart?
Yeah, they have K factor. They have all the SQTs you can imagine, and you can actually. There's one place. I'll send you an email.
So
with the source.
weather.gov?
Say again?
Weather.gov, is that the?
Yes, right.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's pretty good. I mean, so you can actually click on the chart at a point that you want that information, and it will do it all by interpolation. It'll take all the closest ones and give you an interpolation at that one point. Yeah.
Are your presentation, is it online? Is it available?
It is. It's on my little thing, and I'll be happy to send it to Jim.
I'll pass it out.
Yeah.
I'll email it to all the members.
Right.
Plus, we were videoing this anyway, so
Yeah.
it'll be on YouTube.
Okay, good.
Did we post his soaring? Did
Yes.
the soaring one get posted?
Yes.
So it's on there too.
Oh, okay, great. Okay.
And
Well, I
I
wanted to make a disclaimer. I'm not a weather guy. I don't have any.
this on.
Yes, sir.
I'm not a weather guy.
He's a lawyer.
So I'm a recently new pilot. And,
Yep.
And I keep toying with the idea of flying back to Spokane to visit my mom.
Yep.
Words to the wise.
Words. Oh. So you're going to cross the mountains, right?
I don't have much choice.
You don't have much choice.
Say move Spokane elsewhere, yeah.
Well, going from west to east is a little easier, okay, for obvious reasons, because you're going to be on the windward side going in. So what kind of airplane is it?
Beach Sierra.
Okay, so it's I don't know that very well. It's
200 horsepower, low wing.
200. Okay, yeah. So it's a pretty powerful air. So you have no problem getting to 11,000 feet or thereabouts, right?
I haven't gotten there yet.
You haven't gotten there.
Yeah.
So
Haven't tried that.
You haven't tried that. So what I would do is you leave here and you climb out and get as high as you can before you get to the.
Altitude is always your friend, yes.
Yeah, altitude is always your friend. Yeah, and I would check what their weather information looks like as to whether they're predicting high levels of thermal activity. Okay. Because then you can expect a bumpy ride. Over those hills it gets really bumpy. You get thermals. I've been in thermals over there 15 knots vertical. I mean, it's not unusual.
Would you normally just try and fly right through the I-90 corridor, or?
Well, the nice thing about that is they get to the scene of the crash quicker. But that's going west to east. That's not a bad idea because it's the lowest terrain, and so so you don't have to quite climb so high to get over that terrain. It's coming back that's the problem. Okay, and when you come back, you're going to be on the lee side of those mountains. And if you have wave over those mountains at the time, that can be a very intimidating place to be. Okay, and when there's thermal activity, it's not unusual that the clouds are only 1,000 feet or less above the level of the terrain. And,
yeah, I wouldn't be going over that.
yeah, and a lot of people don't like to. That's a very narrow window to be in, and I certainly wouldn't advise that. So I would check that you don't have high winds with high gradient, because that's when you're going to have wave. And I would have a day, preferably that's 2 days before frontal conditions, so that you get calmer weather, so that you know you're not going to have a lot of thermal activity. And you'll be able to predict that, because as you fly, if you're coming from the east side, if there are a lot of thermals, you'll have it on the plains before you get to the hills. Okay, but my advice is, if you've got some high winds aloft and you see lenticulars, put it on the ground.
And earlier in the day, you're going to have a probability of lower winds and lower thermal activity.
Yes,
So
yeah,
that's helpful.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so cross the mountains early in the morning, coming from the east.
Okay.
And you'll have much calmer conditions.
So spend the night.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, yeah. Because they do get bumpy. I mean, we love to go fly for that reason. I mean, you can get thermals to 15,000, 16,000 feet, and cloud base is up high. And then it's okay. I mean, you know, if the cloud base is really high, you fly under those clouds, and your airplane may top out at 11,000 feet, but you get under one of those and just make a couple of turns. And I've flown a 150 over the Sierras, and just by getting in a thermal in Truckee, you get up high enough that you can almost glide home to Sacramento. You know, so altitude is always your friend, and you can use the thermal activity to get there. When you do that, you know, obviously you want to be flying below your VS and maneuvering speed, and not stall speed, sorry. Fly below maneuvering speed, and you can fly in that stuff safely. It's bumpy, you know, but don't be intimidated by it. You know, you'll go up in the rising air, and then let the airplane go up, and when you start going down again, add the power, and that way you can make progress. Yes, sir.
Ian, that's a real good example. A lot of pilots here, I think, want to go to Spokane when they're fairly new. You know, that's kind of a great destination. I'd be doing it at a 172, you know. Yeah. And I haven't made that flight yet. But I'm wondering, when you're coming back from Spokane and it's all flat and brown, how do you determine where you might find that thermal?
Well, first of all, if there's clouds like this, if you can see clouds, then that's where the thermals are underneath those clouds, okay? And we can talk about that for a couple of minutes, but come back to a day when it's clear. Generally speaking, you get the thermals are over the higher ground, so if there's a little bit of a hill, you're going to see, like over the plateau, you know, near Freighter, you're going to get thermals over. You see dust devils over there all the time, and you can actually see those. Dust devils are something you probably want to avoid.
Yeah.
They do get bumpy. And changes in terrain. So when you see, you know, like I talked about Soap Lake, you come up there, there's a lot of real dark, I don't know if it's cultivated or not, but it's real dark terrain right there. And then you come over the lake, and it's blowing that cold air up onto the desert, and wham, you get some pretty ferocious lift right there. If you're close to the ground, if you're within 3,000 feet, you're going to hit that. It's going to be a pretty significant bump. So whenever you get significant changes, look at it and say, okay, that's a heat absorber, that's not. Okay, and the space in between those two is where you're going to get thermal activity. And you can either choose to avoid it or use it, depending on whether you want a comfortable ride or whether you want to save gas. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that helps.
Anything else? Yes, sir.
So you've always studied this over your lifetime.
Yeah.
For newer pilots, are there any other references as far as like written references or you know, as far as you know, another learning tool we could use to read up or?
Yeah, I'll give it. There's a book that was written by a guy named Tom Knopf, who was the first guy in the US to fly a 1,000-kilometer flight, and he's written a book called Glider Basics, and about half of the book is about weather, and the rest of it I think would be interesting to you anyway. It's really it's a different slant on flying, and I think people who understand how the glider stuff works, I think make for being a safer pilot anyway. So it wouldn't hurt to read the rest of the book, but the weather section is really good, and it discusses most of the stuff I've been talking about.
His name was Tom Knopf.
Tom Knopf, K-N-A-U-F, 2 F's, I think, yeah.
AOPA also has some good videos.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do excellent videos. Yeah, and if you go onto NOAA, and there's quite a few tutorial stuff on NOAA as well, on some soaring stuff on there, and there's a couple of pages that show how they do the calculations, you know, for the thermal activity and stuff like that. There's very little I've seen that's on wave prediction, because it's generally a more difficult thing to predict.
One of the best books is Aviation Weather.
Yes,
We've
that's
published by the
excellent.
government,
Yeah, absolutely, excellent, yeah. Good publication. Well, I hope that's been of use to you. So I'm not a weather guy, I just fly in the weather. We can go looking for the weather instead of avoiding it. Yes, sir?
How about giving you a chance for an advertisement? What would we do or need to do then to come and maybe have a flight with you?
That's a good question. Well, I'm leaving here shortly. I'm going to go down to Chehalis and fly 15 Civil Air Patrol cadets this afternoon, and then some more tomorrow. But unless you want to join the Civil Air Patrol, which I'd recommend, by the way, you can't fly in their airplanes. But I have a DG, and send me an email, and I get the thing, you know, there's 13 of us own it, so we don't get to fly it every day, unfortunately. But send me an email and tell me you're interested, and I can tell you what dates are available. And that's a whole different experience. I think most people, it's a very high performance glider. It's big, it's 22 meters wingspan, and has a glide ratio of over 50 to 1, at something like 80 knots. So it goes forever. It will glide over the horizon. It's petrifying. You think, God, I'll never make it to that airport. It's 25 miles away. I can't see it. And then, next thing you know, you're there. It's pretty incredible. Yes, sir.
Any pitch for schools for folks that are thinking about the transition from their powered flight to getting a glider rating?
Yes, I would recommend 2. There's Evergreen Soaring up in Arlington, which is quite good. And they have some Blank L13s, 2-seaters, tandem, one behind the other, and their rates are reasonably good, and they get some fairly good conditions. But the other place I like is North Plains. It's Willamette Valley Soaring Club, which is down in North Plains, not far from Hillsborough, and they have an excellent. I'm an instructor down there. I don't teach very often because I don't have time, but there is a good school down there. And during the spring, they have some excellent weather down there, so you get a chance to do that. Okay. But go back to Civil Air Patrol for a moment. If I know all you guys, there's kind of, well, quite a few in this room are getting to having the same Q-tip hairstyle that I do, and maybe looking at, you know, am I going to go get my medical back? You know, am I going to get another medical next year or whatever? And am I going to keep flying power planes? And gliders are a good way, you know, to get around that problem. Flying gliders is a lot of fun, and the main thing is about you fly them all the time. Okay, and you don't have an autopilot. It's nice to have an autopilot. You can rest and go. Okay, George can fly it for a while, but you have to fly the thing all the time, and you have to fly with a fair amount of skill just to stay in the air. You know, because you've got to go find the lift and fly. You know, you're flying generally, you know, 5 or 10 knots off the stall speed in a steep angle of bank, and it takes honed skill to do that. So you know you're working at it all the time, and it's a challenge. So those of you looking for that, I think gliders is a good way to go. But Civil Air Patrol, we're always looking for people. I'm short of pilots right now. I wish I had guys, another 2 guys with glider ratings that can fly cadets. And if you join up, you know, you basically get to fly gliders for free. I mean, I'm going to go fly this weekend. I'll probably make at least 15 flights, takeoffs and landings, and it's just a joy to get a couple of these cadets who can actually fly the airplane. You know, they're naturals. I had a young gal up at ESTA. We have the emergency services training place up in Ephrata, and This year we took the gliders up there so that the cadets could get to fly. And there was a young Asian girl. She got in the airplane. She'd never flown a simulator, never been in a power plane, and had only had a couple of flights in an airliner. And at the end of 30 minutes, you could fly the airplane as well as I could. And I'm going, God, I've been doing this for 45 years. This kid is just, you know, it was incredible. And those kind of moments make it worthwhile, you know. So if you're interested in doing some of that kind of stuff, you can get your glider rating for virtually nothing. Because if you join the CAP, we encourage you, you know, to do that to get new ratings. And if you do gliders, you get the gliders for free. I mean, you don't have to pay for the rental of the glider or the instructor. You just pay for the tow, which is typically, you know, 40 bucks or something, 50 bucks, I think it is. So it's a cheap way to get a glider rating. And the payback is, you know, you get to fly these young people and get them enthused about aviation, because it's a problem right now, and we don't have enough influx of new people coming into this industry to fill the demand for pilots in the next 10 years. So we're looking, and this is a good way to do that. It was stuff in the funnel at the front end, you know, with these 14, and they could solo at 14. And I love to do that, especially when their parents are there, you know, when mummy comes up and you get out of the airplane and you see, I'll see you later. And they go, no, don't let my daughter go on her own.
Now, Ian, you're going to be doing this 2 days down in Chehalis.
Chehalis, right, yeah.
So if anybody wants to go down there with their airplane now or tomorrow, they can have lunch at the golf course.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. Yeah, there's a nice restaurant on the golf course. It's in walking distance, and come and see the operation down there.
$100 hamburger.
$100 hamburger, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good hamburger, actually.
Well, thank you, Ian.
You're welcome.